Chapter 10. This was your plan all along, to seek refuge with our enemy, Thorin said accusingly to Gandalf. You have no enemies here, Thorin Oakenshield. The only ill will to be found in this valley is that which you bring yourself. Gandalf responded coolly. You think the elves will give our quest their blessing? They will try to stop us. Of course they will. But we have questions that need to be answered. You will leave the talking to me. We continued down the path. It was a long and pushed up against the rock wall beside us. One misstep and we would be done for. Bilbo walked a little bit ahead of me accompanied by Dori and Nori. It made me happy that we were both finding new people to talk to. Boffer hung back to walk with me. Gandalf led the group with Thorin on his tail. The path had leveled out and we now walked on gravel. When we reached the gates a younger-looking elf approached us and turned to Gandalf. Mithrandir, the elf said, addressing Gandalf. I looked at Bilbo confused. He had the same confusion in his own eyes. The elf looked at the group of us with a hint of disgust. Ah, Linda. Gandalf smiled back at the elf. Stay sharp, Thorin whispered to the group. I avoided eye contact with him this time even as I felt his eyes on mine. The two taller men started conversing in Elvish. I felt the leader of our group subtly pushing us into the same circle formation that we were in earlier. This time instead of being in the middle I was beside Balin and Bilbo who held my hand tightly. Suddenly a horn sounded breaking our focus and drawing our attention to 20 or so elves who rode in on horses. They surrounded us, their arrows at the ready. Gandalf, the leader of the elf group said. My Lord Elrond. Gandalf smiled back starting up a conversation in Elvish once again. Why can't they speak in a language we understand? I whispered to Bilbo. Because they don't want us knowing what they are saying. Thorin responded, standing up taller and puffing out his chest as this Lord Elrond looked at him. Welcome Thorin, son of Thrain. Lord Elrond spoke. I do not believe we have met. Thorin responded, stepping forwards. You have your grandfather's bearing. I knew Thro when he ruled under the mountain. Lord Elrond said politely bowing his head the smallest bit. Indeed? He made no mention of you. Thorin spat back. I looked towards him and rolled my eyes. What a great way to start an interaction. Don't be a dick, I whispered to him, earning a surprised glare. Lord Elrond said something to Gandalf in Elvish and looked down at the group of us causing Gloin to get his back up. What is he saying? Does he offer us insult? Gloin yelled. No Master Gloin. He is offering you food. Gandalf told him. Lord Elrond smiled at our group. He told us to follow him and as we started walking I realized we were being surrounded by other elves. Following him wasn't an option, it was an order. Thorin whispered some more under his breath about elves and his dislike for them. The rest of us ignored him. We arrived at another location where we were instructed to drop our packs. It was a smaller room with a view over Rivendell. I didn't argue and sat down on one of the soft pillows in the room. I looked down at my aching feet. Unlike Bilbo I needed shoes for my feet and after pulling them off realized I would need some new socks. Maybe the elves could help. Please this way. Linda said, standing at the entrance to the room. I groaned in frustration, pulling the boots back onto my feet. We all stood up and followed the elf who led us to a long dining table filled with fresh greens, hard-boiled eggs, water, juice, and of course, wine. I was placed between Boffer and Philly. Bilbo sat in front of me and Thorin sat with Lord Elrond and Gandalf at a separate table. Try it. Just a mouthful. I heard Gloin tell the youngest of the company. I don't like green food, Owen said, looking at the piece of lettuce with disgust. I looked down at my plate and picked around. I had nothing against greens but my stomach was off as I thought of some of the close encounters with death we had had. Boffer nudged my arm and broke out of my trance. You okay, lass? He asked me. I sighed and put my fork down on my plate. I know some of you may be used to these possible run-ins with death, but this is new for me. It's a lot to process, that's all. You never get used to it, YN, Thorin mumbled, appearing behind me. I looked up at him, surprised he wanted to weigh in. He locked eyes with me and I could finally see the tiredness he tried so hard to hide. Death, loss, pain, it never gets easier, he continued, looking away from me and out towards Rivendell. If anything, it just dulls you. You become a sad creature with a hard time showing emotion, even if all you feel is sorrow. He looked back down at me and placed his hand on shoulder. I forget what it was like the first time I was close to death. I am sorry this is hard for you. I couldn't respond. A few hours ago I would have roundhouse kicked his ass if he tried to touch my hand, but right now, with the softness in his voice and the guilt in his eyes, it just felt right. He slowly walked towards the rest of the company. Buffer pushed his chair away and stood up aggressively. This is not music, he called out, annoyed. I'll show you music. He stepped onto a display stand, kicking the tray of food off, and looked at the dwarves in amusement. He started to stomp his feet, creating a rhythm. The dwarves soon joined in and even I found myself stopping to the beat. Then he started to sing. There is an inn, a merry old inn, beneath an old grey hill. And there they brew a beer so brown that the man in the moon himself came down one night to drink his fill. The dwarves sang with him, some standing up and dancing around, and some sitting down, banging their hands on the table. The elves looked at our group in annoyance. Obviously they had seen nothing like this before. Boffer continued. The ostler has a tipsy cat that plays a 5-stringed fiddle. And up and down he runs his bow. Now squeaking high, now purring low, now sawing in the middle. The dwarves cheered, stomping their feet and clapping in excitement. I couldn't tell who started it, but someone had started throwing potatoes and other sticky food. The food landed on statues and artifacts I could only assume were old and irreplaceable. I almost apologized on the dwarves' behalf, but when I looked over at Thorin, who had a genuine smile on his face, I changed my mind. I felt my face twist into a smile. Thorin turned his head my way and instead of looking away, I just smiled brighter. The day had gotten darker and the elves led us towards the sleeping room. They looked disgusted with us and sighed as the dwarves broke objects around the room. Sorry about them, I whispered up at the she-elf beside me. She looked down at me. Her body was almost glowing from the light of the moon behind her, and when she smiled at me I was blown away. Elves truly were beautiful. Not to worry, my dear. With that she turned away and walked off. I sighed and walked towards the group. Everyone had created small groups and were looked for places to sleep. I noticed Thorin had not joined the group and was instead peering over the balcony, looking at the beautiful landscape of Rivendell. So about Thorin? I said to Buffer, sitting down beside him. What about him? What was that back there? He spends the first few weeks of our journey hating me, and now we are sharing war stories? It's not that he doesn't like you. From what I can tell, he appears to be nervous that he is trusting you. All of us were forced to trust you and your brother, and while that may seem simple enough for folks like you, us dwarves don't have a variety of people we can place our trust in. Folks like you, what does that mean? Gentlefolk, hobbits. My guess is you spent most of your life knowing everyone who lives around you, not worrying about the things you tell others about yourself. You don't know what it is like to be scared of everyone. We do, Thorin does. So when he finds himself trusting you without really knowing you, it worries him. But you don't understand, Bilbo and I are here to help. Why would we leave our, as you call it, gentle life, for a road trip filled with near-death experiences if we didn't want you to trust us? You are very right and I believe you. Just give him more time, will you? Maybe try and start a conversation with him tonight and see how that goes? Baby steps, lass. I nodded along. Baby steps. Besides lass, Thorin doesn't have much experience when it comes to the lady folk, he said, winking at me. My cheeks grew red and I looked down at my feet. Go over and talk to him, YN. You may be able to provide more comfort than the rest of us, Boffer insisted. I nodded and stood up, walking over to the dwarf. He didn't acknowledge my presence and instead gave a long sigh. Are you okay? I asked him. Of course I am. What is it to you? He responded coldly. I took a breath and held my ground. Buffer said to push on, so that is exactly what I would do. You don't have to be afraid to trust me, you know. He turned his head to look me in the eyes. His face tired, empty, and defeated. What's going on with you? I was pretty sure you didn't like me, so if that's changed then why can't you tell me what's up? I need that door, YN. Or this whole quest, everything, has been for nothing. He turned away from me and crossed his arms. I placed my hand on his forearm, turning him back. He dropped his arms to his side and my hand slowly slid down his arm until it rested atop his fingers. He looked down at our hands and moved his thumb so it traced small circles on the back of my own. I felt my breath shake a bit and, out of fear he would move away, halted all movements. After a few moments I looked back up at him. I wish there was something I could say, I whispered softly. He smiled. You and your brother are doing us all a big favor. It is I that needs to say something. Thank you. I didn't respond. He raised his hand and placed it on the side of my arm. I looked at his eyes and when he smiled at me the rest of the world faded away. We could just stand here forever and forget about everything. My smile lowered a bit when he pulled his hand away from mine. He walked towards the rest of the group and after waiting a short moment I followed, taking my spot next to Buffer. Making progress, huh? Buffer whispered. I sighed, looking at my hands. You look a bit awestruck, Buffer said, smiling. Is he bipolar or something? One day he hates me and the next he looks like he wants to sleep with me. You get used to it. Get some sleep, YN. We don't know what tomorrow will bring.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!